Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku became the Winter Soldier under Hydra's control. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world was a symphony of fire, screams, and the frantic, impotent shouts of heroes. For Izuku Midoriya, it was just noise, a chaotic backdrop to the single, horrifying image that had frozen him in place. The terrified, pleading eyes of Katsuki Bakugo, drowning in a morass of green sludge. It was a monster of living filth, a writhing, amorphous being that had swallowed his childhood friend, his tormentor, his rival, his oldest connection to a past where dreams felt possible. Bakugo, who was always so strong, so explosive, so invincible, was thrashing wildly. His explosions, usually a symbol of overwhelming power, were now just desperate, muffled pops that did more to ignite the surrounding storefronts than harm the villain engulfing him. The pro-heroes at the scene were trapped in a frustrating stalemate. Kamui Woods couldn't risk the fire. MT Lady was too big for the narrow street. Death Arms, for all his strength, couldn't find a solid purchase on the liquid monstrosity. They were doing what they were supposed to do: crowd control, damage mitigation, waiting for someone with the right quirk. Izuku's mind, a frantic engine of analysis that never truly shut down, was already cataloging it all. Sludge composition seems fluid, susceptible to pressure changes. Bakugo's explosions are kinetic force, but unfocused. The villain's eyes are its weak point, a solid mass within the fluid body. Needs a direct, precise strike. But who can get close enough? His muttering was a low, desperate hum under his breath, his knuckles white where he gripped the strap of his yellow backpack. He felt the familiar, bitter sting of uselessness. He was a spectator, a data point in a crowd of helpless civilians. This was the reality All Might had just tried to drill into him mere minutes ago. You can't be a hero. But then, he saw it. Through the sludge, through the desperate explosions, he saw Bakugo's face for a split second. The usual arrogant sneer was gone, replaced by a raw, primal terror. His eyes, wide and red-rimmed, were screaming a message no one else seemed to hear: I'm going to die. Something inside Izuku snapped. It wasn't a thought. It wasn't a plan. It was a pure, primal instinct, an empathetic agony so powerful that it bypassed his brain and went straight to his legs. He was moving before he even realized it, sprinting past the police barricade, ignoring the hero's shocked cries. Kid, no! Get back here! The world narrowed to a tunnel. At the end of it was Bakugo. The sounds of the crowd faded into a dull roar. His mind, however, was suddenly crystal clear. The years of obsessive analysis, of filling notebook after notebook with theories and strategies, coalesced into a single, desperate action. Distraction. I can't beat him, but I can create an opening. He swung his backpack off his shoulders, the heavy textbooks and notebooks inside making it a decent projectile. He flung it with all his might, aiming for the villain's bulging eyes. The corner of a thick history textbook struck true. The villain roared in pain and surprise, its slimy form recoiling for a fraction of a second. It was enough. Izuku was already there, his fingers clawing uselessly at the sludge, trying to get a grip, trying to pull Bakugo free. Kaken! He screamed, his voice raw. What the hell are you doing here, Deku? Bakugo choked out, his voice a mix of fury and relief. Get out of here! My legs they just moved! Izuku cried, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the grime. I couldn't just stand there and watch you die. He saw a flicker of something in Bakugo's eyes, shock, confusion, maybe even a sliver of gratitude, before it was swallowed again by the sludge. The villain had recovered, its rage now focused entirely on the quirkless gnat who dared to interfere. A slimy tendril lashed out, poised to strike Izuku down, and then, a shadow fell over them. I really am pathetic, a booming voice declared, filled with self-recrimination. A massive figure stood there, his form seeming to reclaim its lost bulk through sheer force of will. I preached the virtues of a hero, yet I failed to live by them. All Might. Detroit smash. The punch was a force of nature. It wasn't just a strike, it was a weather event. The air pressure shifted so violently that the sludge villain was blasted apart, its form atomizing into a fine green mist that was carried away on the gale. The very clouds above seemed to part, and a sudden, cleansing rain began to fall. Izuku was knocked to the ground, shielded from the worst of the blast by All Might's immense frame. He lay there, gasping for air, the adrenaline leaving him as a trembling, soaked heap on the pavement. He had done it. He had helped. The aftermath was a blur of motion and sound. Paramedics rushed to check on Bakugo. Reporters swarmed All Might. And the other pro-heroes, their expressions a mixture of relief and stern disapproval, descended upon Izuku. That was incredibly reckless, son. You could have been killed. Death Arms admonished. You're lucky All Might showed up. You interfered with our work and put yourself and the hostage in more danger, Kamui Woods added, his tone sharp. They weren't wrong. He knew they weren't wrong. He stood there, dripping and shivering, head bowed as he received their lecture. Across the way, he saw Bakugo being praised for his bravery and powerful quirk, even as the explosive teen shot him a look of pure, unadulterated rage. The message was clear: you didn't save me. You just got in the way, you useless nerd. The familiar ache of worthlessness settled back into his chest, heavier than before. He had acted like a hero for 10 seconds, and the world had immediately reminded him of his place. The walk home was a lonely, silent pilgrimage through his own failure. He'd had his audience with God on a rooftop, and God had told him he was unworthy. He had tried to defy that judgment in the street, and the world's angels had chastised him for his hubris. The dream, the single, burning star that had guided his entire life, was not just fading. It had been extinguished, leaving behind a cold, black vacuum. He walked with his head down, his wet clothes clinging to his skin, his mind a maelstrom of replayed conversations. It's not wrong to dream. However, you need to be realistic, kid. All Might's words echoed, each one a hammer blow against the fragile foundations of his identity. He hadn't meant to be cruel. Izuku knew that. He was kind, he was just, honest. The #1 hero, the symbol of peace, had looked a quirkless, wannabe hero in the eyes and told him the truth. A truth Izuku had spent 14 years trying to deny. He turned a corner, his feet carrying him on autopilot. He didn't even notice the sleek, black van parked unobtrusively in a no-parking zone halfway down the block. Inside, 2 men in simple, dark suits sat watching a small monitor, which displayed a zoomed-in feed of the boy's dejected face. Subject is approaching, the man in the passenger seat said, his voice a low, clinical monotone. Emotional state is optimal. Despair, isolation, ego death. He's been psychologically tenderized by his own idol. The preliminary conditioning will take hold easily. Commander's orders are clear, the driver replied, not taking his eyes off the feed. Acquire the asset? No witnesses. No complications. Understood. The target profile is perfect. High intelligence, analytical prowess, 0 quirk factor to interfere with the serum, or our indoctrination tech. He is the blank slate we've been searching for. On the street, Izuku passed a small city park. He stopped, his gaze falling upon a municipal trash can, overflowing with the day's refuse. In his hand, he still clutched his notebook, the one All Might had signed. It was soggy, the ink running, the pages warped. Hero Analysis for the Future, Volume 13, Future. What a joke. He looked at the title, his own neat, obsessive handwriting, and felt a surge of self-loathing so profound it made him nauseous. It was a child's diary of impossible fantasies, a pathetic catalogue of powers he would never have, of a world he could never belong to. It was the source of his pain, the physical manifestation of his delusion. With a choked sob, he shoved the notebook into the trash can. He didn't just drop it in, he pushed it down deep, burying it under greasy fast food wrappers and discarded newspapers, as if trying to bury the part of himself that had written it. He scrubbed his hands on his pants, trying to wipe away the phantom feeling of the pen, the paper, the dream. He turned away, leaving the last remnant of his childhood to rot. He felt empty. Lighter, in a terrifying way. There was nothing left to hope for, and in that void, there was a strange, hollow peace. He just wanted to go home, crawl into bed, and not exist for a while. To get there, he had 2 options: the main, well-lit street, or a narrow, winding alleyway that was a common shortcut. Normally, he would have avoided the alley. It was always dark, even in the afternoon, and had a reputation for petty crime. But today, he craved the shadows. He didn't want to see anyone. He didn't want anyone to see the utter brokenness in his eyes. He chose the alley. The air grew cooler as soon as he stepped between the two tall buildings. The sounds of the city muffled, replaced by the drip of a leaky pipe and the scuttling of unseen things. He kept his eyes on the cracked pavement, his shoulders hunched, a perfect picture of a defeated soul. He was halfway through when a shadow detached itself from a recessed doorway in front of him. A tall man in a dark suit. Izuku stopped, his heart giving a nervous flutter. Before he could turn around, he heard the soft scrape of a shoe on gravel behind him. Another man, just as tall, just as imposing, had blocked his exit. "Can I help you?" Izuku asked, his voice barely a whisper. Neither man spoke. The one in front began to walk toward him, his movements fluid and unnervingly silent. Panic, cold and sharp, finally pierced through Izuku's depressive fog. This wasn't a mugging. Their posture was wrong. It was predatory, efficient. He did the only thing he could think of. He bolted, trying to scramble up a rusty fire escape. It was a desperate, clumsy move. He only made it 2 steps before an arm, strong as steel, wrapped around his chest and neck, cutting off his air. He was dragged back down to the ground. But Izuku wasn't the same boy he was that morning. He had seen his idol bleed. He had charged a monster. He had been broken. Something wild and scrappy, a cornered animal's will to survive, flared to life. He thrashed, stomped on his captor's instep, and bit down hard on the hand covering his mouth. He tasted blood and was rewarded with a muffled grunt of pain. The hand loosened for a second, and he sucked in a ragged breath to scream, but the second man was already there. A swift, precise chop to the side of his neck sent a blinding, electric pain through his body. His limbs went numb, and he collapsed, his struggles ceasing. He was still conscious, but barely. His vision was blurring, his body refusing to obey him. He was being lifted, one man on each arm, and dragged toward the mouth of the alley. His head lolled to the side, his unfocused gaze catching a glint of metal on the lapel of the man to his left. It was a small, silver pin. A skull, stark and menacing. But where the jaw should have been, there were writhing tentacles. The image was bizarre, alien, and deeply unsettling. It meant nothing to him, yet his analytical mind, even in its dying moments of freedom, logged the detail with perfect clarity. A skull. Tentacles. What is that? A thick, black canvas bag was pulled over his head, plunging him into a world of suffocating darkness and the smell of dust. He felt himself being bundled into the back of a vehicle. The doors slid shut with a heavy, final thump, sealing him off from the world. He heard the engine start, felt the van pull away from the curb, and knew with a certainty that chilled him to his very marrow that no one had seen. No one was coming. Izuku Midoriya had just disappeared from the face of the earth. His last conscious thought was of his mother, of the dinner he would now never get to eat. Then, the darkness behind his eyes consumed him completely. Time ceased to be a linear concept. It became a fragmented series of agonizing moments, a nightmare kaleidoscope from which there was no waking. Flash. Cold. The floor is cold and concrete. The air smells of sterile antiseptic and damp stone. He is in a small, windowless cell. He doesn't know how long he has been here. Hours? Days? He screams until his throat is raw. No one comes. Food is pushed through a slot in the door. Water is provided. Otherwise, he is alone with the crushing silence and the fading memories of a son he can no longer see. Flash. Pain. His body is pushed past every conceivable limit. He runs on a treadmill until he collapses, only to be shocked with a cattle prod and forced to run again. He does push-ups with weights strapped to his back until his arms give out, then he is made to do more. He is taught to fight, not the flashy, heroic brawling of the heroes on TV, but a brutal, efficient science of violence. How to break a bone with minimal effort. How to disable a joint. How to kill a man with his bare hands in under 5 seconds. His instructors are silent, masked figures who communicate through harsh gestures and painful corrections. His body is no longer his own, it is a machine being brutally calibrated. Flash. The needle. It stings as it pierces the skin of his arm, a cold fluid flooding his veins. At first, it makes him sick. Then, he feels a surge of something unnatural. His muscles knit together faster after the grueling training. He is stronger, faster than he has any right to be. They are rebuilding him from the inside out, a chemical cocktail rewriting his biology, but it comes at a cost. His thoughts become foggy, his memories less distinct. The face of his mother is becoming harder to recall. The sound of All Might's voice is a distant echo. The serum that builds his body erodes his mind. Flash. Agony. White-hot, blinding agony. There was an accident during a live-fire training exercise. A stray explosion. Or at least, that's what they told him. He remembers a flash, a scream that was his own, and the sight of his left arm, mangled and useless. Now he is strapped to a table under blindingly bright lights. The whirring of a bone saw is the loudest thing in the universe. He smells his own flesh charring as they cauterize the wound. He screams and screams, but he is bolted down. Then, they bring in the replacement. It is gleaming, segmented silver and black. He feels the cold metal press against the raw stump of his shoulder. He feels the drill vibrate through his skeleton as they anchor it to his bones. He feels the terrifying, spider-like crawl of neuroconnectors weaving into his spinal column, fusing machine with man. He passes out, but the phantom pain is his new constant companion. Flash. The chair. This is the worst part. Worse than the training, worse than the surgery. He is strapped into a metal chair. A heavy, intricate helmet is lowered over his head, humming with latent power. A thick rubber bit is forced between his teeth. They ask him questions. What is your name? Izuku. Midoriya. He gasps out, the name tasting foreign on his tongue. A jolt of electricity lances through his skull. It is not pain, it is pure, white-hot oblivion. It is the sensation of his own thoughts being boiled away. He convulses, biting down hard on the rubber guard. The smell of ozone fills the air. When the current stops, he is left trembling, drool leaking from his mouth. Who are you? The cold, dispassionate voice asks again from a speaker. He can't remember. He sees flashes of green hair, a kind smile. A woman. Mom? He sees a blond boy with an explosive temper. Kakin? He sees a giant of a man with a radiant smile. All Might? They are ghosts, phantoms in a dying mind. The electricity hits him again. Harder this time. The images burn away, turning to ash. This process is repeated. Again and again. For days, or weeks, or months. They systematically dismantle his psyche, erasing every memory, every connection, every piece of the boy named Izuku. They are hollowing him out, preparing the vessel for new instructions. Flash. The voice. After a particularly brutal session in the chair, when he is nothing more than a trembling, empty shell, the voice begins. It is calm, measured, hypnotic. It speaks in Japanese, his native tongue, but the words are alien. They are keys, designed to lock away what little is left of him and enforce a new reality. Your past is a dream, the voice says. There is only the mission, and then the words. The trigger sequence. The liturgy of his new existence. Murioku. Powerless. He remembers the feeling of being quirkless. The years of being helpless. The voice takes that feeling and turns it into a foundation stone. You are nothing without us, Zetsubo. Despair. He remembers the rooftop. All Might turning his back. The crushing weight of his dead dream. The voice latches onto it. Your old hope was a lie. We are your only truth, says A. Rebirth. He feels the phantom ache in his shoulder, the cold weight of the metal arm fused to his being. He remembers the serum burning in his veins. We destroyed you. We rebuilt you. You belong to us, Shiko. Service. He remembers the endless training, the brutal discipline. The feeling of his body moving on command, a perfect weapon. You do not have a will. You have a function, Mokutiki. Purpose. The voice provides the final, damning piece. Your purpose is to obey. Your purpose is the mission. Your purpose is Hydra. Over and over, the words are drilled into him. In his cell. During training. While he sleeps. They are the new architecture of his mind. A cage built from the ashes of his own despair. One day, they bring him before a man in a sharp, immaculate suit. The man has a monocle and a cold, reptilian gaze. He circles the boy, the asset, like a collector admiring a prized statue. The asset stands perfectly still, his eyes vacant, his breathing even. His new metal arm gleams under the fluorescent lights. Report, the man orders. The asset's mouth opens, and a voice that is not quite his own speaks, flat and devoid of any emotion. Ready to comply. The man smiles, a thin, cruel slash across his face. Excellent. The conditioning is complete. The world is plagued by the chaos of quirks, these genetic wildcards that threaten true order. But you are the answer. Controlled, enhanced, predictable. You will be our ghost, our Cipher. The perfect weapon to bring this world to heel. He gestures to a nearby technician. Wipe him and put him on ice. His first mission is in 2 weeks. The asset is led back to the chair, but there is no fear, no resistance. There is nothing. He sits, and the helmet is lowered. The familiar hum begins. He closes his eyes. There are no more flashes of a grieving mother. No more echoes of an explosive rival. No more lingering images of a smiling hero. There is only darkness. And then the words, Murioku. Zetsubo. Seze. Shiko. Mokotiki. Izuka Midoriya was gone. He had been erased, overwritten. In his place was Project Cipher, the asset. A ghost in the making, waiting for a command, ready to comply. 5 years is a lifetime. For the heroes of Japan, it was 5 years of relative peace following the fall of All for One, a time of rebuilding trust and training a new, promising generation at UA High School. For the general populace, it was 5 years of feeling secure under the watchful eyes of a new pantheon of pro-heroes. But for the denizens of the underworld, the criminals, the brokers of information, and the villains who thrived in the shadows, 5 years was long enough for a new kind of fear to take root. It was long enough for a ghost story to become a terrifying reality. They didn't have a name for him, not at first. He was just a whisper in a smoke-filled pachinko parlor, a paranoid rumor traded in a back-alley deal, a fixer for a Yakuza clan, found in his penthouse with every bone in both arms systematically broken, the data from his laptop wiped clean, a notorious arms dealer, discovered unconscious in a locked, airtight panic room, a single, untraceable neurotoxin in his system that left him in a week-long coma. No witnesses. No signs of forced entry. No quirk residue. Slowly, a profile began to form from the whispers. The ghost was silent. He was impossibly fast. He fought with a brutal, terrifying precision that felt less human and more like a machine executing a program. Most unnervingly, in a world defined by the awesome and varied power of quirks, he had none. The few who survived an encounter, and were coherent enough to speak of it, all said the same thing. He was just a man, but a man who moved like a phantom and struck like a thunderbolt. They started calling him Kihai, the ghost. But the international syndicates he occasionally brushed against had a more clinical, more chilling name for him, a name they had intercepted from encrypted communications that spoke of a successful project, Cipher. Because the one strange detail that sometimes surfaced, the only thing that broke his inhuman silence, was a low, constant, almost subliminal muttering. It was the sound of a voice rapidly processing data, a stream of consciousness tactical analysis that preceded every impossibly perfect move. He wasn't just fighting, he was calculating the precise anatomy of a victory, and his victims were nothing more than variables in an equation. Tonight, the equation was set in the gleaming heart of Mizudafu's corporate district. Aegis Security Solutions, a company that had made its fortune developing next-generation surveillance and anti-espionage technology, was Cipher's target. Their CEO, Kenji Tanaka, had recently signed a lucrative contract with the Hero Public Safety Commission, a contract Hydra coveted and intended to sabotage. More than that, Tanaka himself was a former Hydra scientist who had defected years ago, taking with him knowledge that the organization could not allow to be shared. The mission was simple: retrieve the project data he stole, and permanently retire the asset. From a rooftop across the street, Cipher watched the Aegis Tower. He was a silhouette against the neon-drenched sky, perfectly still. 5 years of brutal conditioning had chiseled Azuka-Midoriya's once soft frame into something hard and lethal. He wore black, non-reflective tactical gear, his face obscured by a dark ballistic mask and a pair of glowing green goggles that fed him thermal and electromagnetic data. His left arm, a marvel of sinister engineering, was made of segmented plates of a matte black alloy, culminating in a hand that could crush steel. The faint green hair, cut short and severe, was the only vestige of the boy he used to be, a detail his handlers had deemed irrelevant. His internal chronometer, a subtle implant behind his ear, ticked down to 0. 2300 hours, the optimal time. The majority of the night staff was on their lower floor break. A low, sibilant whisper, barely audible over the wind, began to emanate from behind the mask. Target building, Aegis Tower. 75 floors. Objective on 73rd floor, CEO's office. Standard security patrol, 3-man teams, 15-minute rotations. Thermal imaging shows 2 guards approaching northwest corner corridor, floor 73. Predictable route. Ventilation shaft overhead. Structural integrity of grating, 78%. Acceptable risk for silent entry. He moved. There was no hesitation, no wasted motion. He took a running start and leaped from the edge of the rooftop. For a horrifying moment, he was a falling star against the city lights, plummeting toward the street 60 stories below. But he wasn't aiming for the ground. With his cybernetic arm, he fired a high-tensile grappling line. The claw at the end bit into the concrete facade of the Aegis Tower with a barely audible thump. He swung, using the momentum to arc up and land silently on a narrow ledge just below a maintenance access window. The window was magnetically sealed. A fool's lock against a man like him. His left hand unfolded, fingertips revealing a set of sophisticated lockpicking and slicing tools. He plugged a thin wire into the seam of the window. The electronic lock sparked once and disengaged. He slid inside, a shadow pouring into the building's sterile, white interior. He moved through the hallways with an unnatural grace, his footsteps making no sound on the polished marble floors. The 2 guards he had spotted from afar rounded the corner, their conversation about a recent hero fight dying on their lips as they saw him. They were professionals, reacting instantly. One reached for his sidearm while the other lunged forward with a stun baton. Cipher's muttering quickened, a low hum of combat data. 2 hostiles. Heart rates elevated, 135, 142. Adrenaline spike detected. Hostile Alpha is right-handed, will lead with a forward thrust from the baton. Hostile Beta is fumbling his draw, poor trigger discipline. Inefficient. He moved before they could process his presence. He sidestepped the baton thrust, his right hand shooting out to grip the guard's wrist. With a clinical twist, he dislocated the man's shoulder. The guard screamed, a sound that was cut short as Cipher's other hand delivered a precise chop to his throat, collapsing him to the ground, gasping and incapacitated. The second guard finally managed to draw his weapon, but it was far too late. Cipher was already on him, closing the distance in a single, fluid step. The metal arm shot out, not in a punch, but with an open palm that slammed into the guard's chest. It wasn't the force that did the damage, but the taser-like electrodes that pulsed on contact. The guard convulsed, his gun clattering to the floor as his nervous system was overwhelmed. He crumpled in a heap, unconscious. 2 threats neutralized in 3.7 seconds. Brutal. Efficient. Non-lethal, as per his secondary mission parameters. Dead bodies invited too much investigation. Incapacitated ones just looked like a failed security detail. He continued toward the CEO's office, a ghost leaving a trail of broken men behind him. The door to Kenji Tanaka's office was a slab of reinforced titanium. A plaque on the wall read, Kenji Tanaka CEO. Vision. Security. Progress. Cipher ignored it. He placed the palm of his metal hand on the electronic lock next to the door. A surge of directed electromagnetic energy fried the console. With a heavy clunk, the magnetic bolts retracted. He pushed the door open. Kenji Tanaka was a man who exuded an aura of arrogant confidence. He sat behind a massive obsidian desk, not looking surprised, but annoyed. He was in his late 50s, with sharp eyes and a sneer that seemed permanently etched onto his face. So, the council finally sent one of their dogs to my door, Tanaka said, his voice laced with contempt. He pressed a button under his desk. You're too late. The silent alarm was tripped the moment your men went down. The heroes will be here any second. Cipher didn't respond. He walked to the main terminal on Tanaka's desk, his movements calm and deliberate. He pulled a small, black drive from a pouch on his belt and plugged it into the console. Lines of code began to scroll rapidly across the screen as the drive siphoned decades of proprietary data. Data transfer initiated, Cipher muttered, his gaze fixed on the progress bar. Estimated time, 93 seconds. Don't you hear me? Tanaka stood, his bravado starting to crack as the silent assassin completely ignored him. I gave all my research to the commission. It's over. Hydra will be exposed. Cipher tilted his head slightly, the green lenses of his goggles seeming to stare right through Tanaka. Subject's vocal stress indicates deception. Heart rate at 160. Perspiration on the upper lip. He is lying. The most valuable data would be kept separate. A personal drive. Location briefcase. His gaze flickered to a sleek, leather briefcase beside the desk. Stay away from that. Tanaka roared, pulling a small, futuristic-looking pistol from his desk drawer and firing. The shot was a beam of concussive energy. Cipher moved with impossible speed, his metal arms snapping up to block the blast. The energy dissipated harmlessly against the alloy. Before Tanaka could fire again, Cipher had crossed the room. He snatched the pistol from Tanaka's hand, crushing it in his metal grip as if it were a soda can. He grabbed Tanaka by the front of his expensive suit, lifting him effortlessly off the ground. Where is the rest of it? Cipher's voice was a dead, synthesized rasp, filtered through his mask. It was the first time he had spoken more than a single word, and the sound was profoundly inhuman. Tanaka's eyes widened in terror. I don't know what you're talking about. Cipher's grip tightened. His other hand reached into a small pouch and produced a syringe filled with a clear liquid. Lying is irrelevant. Objective remains. Just as he brought the needle toward Tanaka's neck, the lights in the room went out. Shota Aizawa, known to the world as the pro-hero Eraserhead, landed as silently as a cat on the 73rd floor. He had been on a routine underground patrol nearby when the call came in, a high-priority silent alarm at the Aegis Tower. Given the sensitive nature of their work, it was a call he had to answer personally. He moved through the darkened hallways, his capture weapon, a long, versatile scarf made of a steel wire alloy woven with carbon nanofibers, drifting around his shoulders like a living thing. His worn, yellow goggles were pulled over his eyes, which were already glowing with a faint, red light. He found the first two guards. He knelt, checking their pulses. Strong, but they were out cold. One had a dislocated shoulder and laryngeal bruising. The other showed signs of a high-voltage shock. The work was precise, tactical. Not a random villain attack. This was a professional. He continued down the hall, his senses on high alert. He saw the heavy titanium door to the CEO's office hanging slightly ajar, the lock next to it fried. He deactivated the building's emergency power from a nearby panel, plunging the entire floor into darkness, save for the ambient glow of the city outside. Darkness was his ally. He slipped into the office, a wraith in the gloom. He saw two figures. One, a large man in a suit, was held aloft by a second, sleeker figure in black tactical gear. The assailant had a strange, metallic arm, and Aizawa could see the glint of a syringe in his other hand. Drop him, Aizawa said, his voice a low, tired drawl that held an undisguised threat. The party's over. The figure in black dropped Tanaka, who crumpled to the floor, gasping. Then, he turned to face Aizawa. In the dim light, the glowing green lenses of his goggles gave him an insectoid, predatory look. Aizawa's eyes flared red as he activated his quirk, Erasure. Every nerve in his body was screaming that this opponent was dangerous. He tensed, ready for the man's quirk to fail, for the element of surprise to give him the opening he needed. Nothing happened. The man in black didn't stumble. He didn't show any sign of power loss. He just stood there, his head tilted in a curious, analytical manner. Aizawa felt a cold knot of dread form in his stomach. He had fought countless villains in his career. His quirk had never failed to work unless the opponent's power was a mutation type. But this man looked perfectly normal, physically speaking. There was only one other possibility, one so rare in the world of high-stakes villainy that it was almost unthinkable. He's quirkless? Before the thought could fully form, the intruder moved. He launched himself forward, not with the flash of a speed quirk, but with the raw, explosive power of perfectly trained muscle. He was a blur of black, closing the 20 feet between them in a heartbeat. Aizawa reacted on pure instinct, flinging his capture weapon. The durable scarf wrapped around the man's torso and his cybernetic arm, pulling tight. Aizawa braced himself, expecting to halt the man's momentum and restrain him. Instead, the man didn't even slow down. He planted his feet and pulled. Aizawa, a grown man and a seasoned pro-hero, was yanked forward, stumbling as his own weapon was used against him. The man's muttering was now audible, a low, chilling litany. Capture weapon. Carbon fiber alloy. High tensile strength. Exploitable. Predictable arc used momentum against him. He used the captured scarf to swing Aizawa into the large obsidian desk. The hero grunted as his back hit the hard edge, the impact knocking the wind out of him. The man released the scarf and lunged, his metal hand aiming for Aizawa's face. Aizawa twisted away, the metal fingers scraping against the wall where his head had been, gouging deep furrows into the plaster. This was not normal strength. This was something else entirely. Enhanced. Who are you? Aizawa grunted, lashing out with a kick. The man blocked it with his flesh and blood arm, the blow landing with a dull thud. He didn't even flinch. Pro-hero, Eraserhead. Quirk, Erasure. Nullifies quirk factors through line of sight. Useless against non-quirk targets. Fighting style. Relies on quirk negation to create openings for capture and close-quarters combat. Acknowledged. The analytical breakdown was so precise, so unnervingly accurate, that it threw Aizawa off more than any physical attack. It was like fighting a supercomputer that could predict his every move. He pushed off the desk, creating distance, his mind racing. Quirkless, but superhumanly strong and fast. Highly trained. Tactical analysis on the fly. And that voice, that strange, incessant muttering, it was familiar somehow. He felt a phantom memory tickle the edge of his consciousness, the image of a green-haired boy in a UA entrance exam, exhibiting that same strange habit, but it was a fleeting thought, dismissed as impossible. Aizawa was a master of improvisation. He changed tactics. Instead of trying to capture, he used his weapon like a whip, snapping it at the man's legs to throw him off balance. The man leaped over it, then used his metal arm to grab the scarf midair. He yanked it hard, pulling Aizawa forward again, and this time he was ready. He delivered a brutal elbow strike to Aizawa's side, striking a pressure point that sent a jolt of pain up the hero's ribs. Aizawa gasped, his vision swimming for a second. In that instant of weakness, the assassin struck again. A sweep kick knocked Aizawa's feet out from under him. He fell, but twisted midair to land on his hands, flipping back to his feet. He was on the defensive. He, Eraserhead, one of the most formidable underground heroes in Japan, was being systematically dismantled by a quirkless opponent. The sheer raw power and skill were overwhelming. The metal arm was a terrifying weapon, blocking every strike and delivering bone-jarring blows. But it was the man's other side, his right side, that was just as dangerous. Every punch, every block, was delivered with a cold, terrifying efficiency. Aizawa knew he couldn't win a direct confrontation. He needed to escape, regroup, and bring backup. This was far beyond a simple corporate espionage case. He threw a smoke pellet to the floor. The office filled with thick gray smoke. Obscuring agent. Standard hero equipment. Thermal vision negates, Cipher muttered, the green lenses of his goggles cutting through the haze as if it weren't there. He saw Aizawa's thermal signature moving toward the broken window. He lunged through the smoke, but Aizawa was ready. He hadn't been making for the window. It was a feint. As Cipher passed him, Aizawa shot out his leg, tripping the assassin. For the first time, Cipher stumbled. It was a minor victory, but it was an opening. Aizawa wrapped his capture weapon around the man's neck, pulling him into a chokehold. "It's over," he grunted, applying pressure. "Give up." For a moment, there was resistance. Then, an unnerving stillness. The muttering stopped. Aizawa felt the body in his arms go limp. He thought he had won, that the man had passed out. He was wrong. With a surge of power that defied all logic, Cipher activated a mechanism in his spine. His entire body arched backward, slamming Aizawa into the wall behind them. The hero's head hit the concrete with a sickening crack. Stars exploded in his vision, and his grip slackened. Cipher spun around, his metal hand clamping around Aizawa's throat, pinning him to the wall and lifting him a few inches off the ground. Aizawa struggled, his air supply cut off, his vision starting to tunnel. The green lenses were inches from his face. He could hear the low hum of the assassin's analytical muttering start up again, calm and steady, as if their life or death struggle was nothing more than a curious experiment. Mission compromised by pro-hero arrival. Primary objective complete. Secondary objective incomplete but acceptable losses. Retreat protocol initiated. The grip on his throat vanished. Cipher stepped back, looked at the data drive, which was now blinking with a steady green light, and pulled it from the terminal. He turned to the window, no longer seeing Aizawa as a threat, but as an obstacle that had been neutralized. He fired his grappling hook out the window and, without a second glance, leaped into the night, vanishing as silently as he had arrived. Aizawa collapsed to the floor, coughing, dragging in painful, ragged breaths. His head was throbbing, and he could already feel a world-class concussion setting in. He pushed himself up, leaning against the wall, and watched the grappling line retract into the darkness. He had failed. The target was dead. He could see Tanaka lying motionless, a small dart in his neck, and the intruder had escaped. But it wasn't the failure that chilled him to the bone. It was the feeling of utter helplessness he had experienced. It was the assassin's impossible strength, his cold precision, and it was the sound. As the assassin had turned to leave, Aizawa had heard the muttering one last time, clearer than before. A rapid, whispered analysis of his escape route, and in that whisper, beneath the metallic rasp of the mass vocoder, he heard it. The faint, unmistakable cadence of a voice he might have heard before. A nervous, analytical pattern of speech that was so unique, so familiar. He staggered over to the broken desk, his ribs screaming in protest, and activated his comms. "This is Eraserhead," he rasped, his voice hoarse. "Target is down. The suspect has escaped. Send a full forensics team and an ambulance." There was a pause on the other end, then the voice of Detective Scotchy came through. "Shota? What happened? What did you see?" Aizawa leaned his head back against the wall, closing his eyes, the memory of that strange, analytical muttering echoing in his mind. "I don't know," he said, his voice barely a whisper. He was quirkless. But he wasn't normal. He was strong, Tsukachi. Unnaturally strong. "And I think I'm going to need you to pull the file on every missing quirkless person reported in the last 5 to 10 years. Because a ghost now haunted Mizurufu, and Shota Aizawa had the terrifying feeling that it was the ghost of someone who should have been a hero. The late afternoon sun cast long, distorted shadows across the bustling streets of Esoha City. For Katsuki Bakugo, the world was a cacophony of minor annoyances he was forced to endure. The incessant chatter of civilians, the gratingly cheerful jingle of a nearby ice cream truck, the way the cheap fabric of his provisional hero costume chafed slightly at his neck. It was all kindling for the simmering furnace of his ambition. "Man, you gotta lighten up, Baku bro," Eijiro Kirishima said, clapping a hand on his friend's shoulder. Kirishima, a radiant sunbeam of positivity in a bright red and black costume, seemed immune to the day-to-day irritations that plagued Bakugo. "It's a beautiful day. We're on patrol with a top 10 hero. This is awesome." "It's not awesome, shitty hair. It's boring," Bakugo grumbled, shoving Kirishima's hand away. He scanned the crowds, his crimson eyes narrowed in a perpetual state of vigilance that bordered on aggression. "We've been walking in circles for 3 hours and the biggest threat we've faced was a lost cat. I didn't get my provisional license to be a damn pet psychic." Up ahead, their mentor for this work study, the pro-hero Fat Gum, chuckled, the sound like a drum roll in his massive chest. Patience is a heroic virtue, Bakugo. 99% of hero work is just being present. It's about letting the people see you, letting them feel safe. He took a massive bite out of a takoyaki skewer he bought from a street vendor. Besides, you learn to appreciate the quiet days, Bakugo scoffed. Quiet was for extras. He craved the roar of battle, the thrill of a real fight where he could prove, definitively, that he was destined for the #1 spot. This was purgatory with better snacks. His instincts, honed by years of combat and a near-psychotic level of competitive drive, suddenly screamed. It wasn't a sound or a sight, but a subtle shift in the city's rhythm. A tremor of wrongness. He stopped dead, his head snapping towards the elevated expressway that snaked between the skyscrapers. "What is it?" Kirishima asked, his cheerful demeanor vanishing, replaced by a focused readiness. "Something's." Bakugo started, but was cut off by a deafening boom. A plume of black smoke erupted from the overpass 2 blocks away. The screech of tortured metal and the shattering of glass echoed through the district. Panic screams rose from the street below as debris rained down. Fat Gum swallowed his takoyaki in one go, his expression instantly hardening from jovial mentor to seasoned professional. "That's no accident. Let's move!" The three of them broke into a sprint, weaving through the terrified, fleeing crowds. Bakugo was in his element now, the boredom vaporized, replaced by a surge of adrenaline. He used small, controlled explosions from his palms to propel himself forward, his boots skidding on the asphalt as he outpaced the others. He reached the base of the overpass first. The scene was chaos. A convoy of 3 heavily armored trucks was stalled, the lead and rear vehicles burning fiercely. The middle truck, larger and more reinforced than the others, seemed to be the focus of the attack. Its armored plating was buckled, and figures in black tactical gear were swarming it, attempting to attach some kind of device to the door. "Civilians are trapped in their cars up there," Fat Gum yelled as he and Kirishima caught up. "Kirishima, your job is evac and defense. Get those people out of the crossfire." "Unbreakable, you got it." Kirishima hardened his skin with a grimace of effort, and charged up the nearest emergency ramp, becoming a living shield for the terrified motorists. "Bakugo, you're with me," Fat Gum commanded. "We take out the hostiles and secure that truck. Don't have to tell me twice." Bakugo grinned, a feral, wolfish expression. He blasted himself into the air, landing on the overpass with a ground-shaking thud. "Hey, you bastards! Your playtime is officially over." The half-dozen Hydra agents on the ground turned, raising advanced-looking rifles. But before they could fire, a shadow dropped from the roof of the targeted truck. It was Cipher. He landed in a silent crouch between the agents and the approaching heroes. He looked different in the harsh daylight. His tactical gear seemed to absorb the light, making him a void in the middle of the chaos. The green lenses of his goggles glowed with an eerie, predatory light, and the matte black of his cybernetic arms seemed to promise nothing but violence. "Just one guy?" Bakugo snarled, his palms starting to crackle. "I'll turn this loser to ash in 5 seconds. Fat Gum put a hand out, stopping him. "Wait. There's something off about him. All the intel from Eraserhead's report, this is him. The ghost." Cipher rose to his full height, his head tilted as he processed the new variables. His low, sibilant muttering began, a sound that was almost lost in the crackle of the fires and the distant sirens. New variables introduced. Pro-hero Fat Gum. Quirk, Fat Absorption. Kinetic energy is ineffective. High durability. Secondary variable, UA student. Provisional license visible. Quirk, Explosion. High damage output volatile, area of effect potential. Primary threat. Neutralize the student first. Bakugo didn't wait for a plan. He was the plan. With a roar, he launched himself forward, a comet of orange and black. AP shot. He fired a concentrated, armor-piercing blast, a pinpoint of explosive power designed to drill through defenses. It was fast, precise, and devastatingly powerful, and Cipher dodged it. He didn't just dive out of the way. He moved with a liquid, predictive grace that seemed to defy physics. He took a single, precise sidestep, letting the blast fly past his ear and obliterate a chunk of the concrete barrier behind him. He hadn't reacted to the shot. He had moved before Bakugo had even finished aiming, as if he had analyzed the subtle shift in Bakugo's shoulder muscles, the angle of his arm, and calculated the trajectory down to the millimeter. Bakugo's eyes widened in disbelief. No one moved that fast. No one anticipated his AP shot like that. He landed, skidding to a halt, and immediately pivoted, unleashing a wide, sweeping explosion meant to catch his opponent off guard. Cipher dropped, his body impossibly low to the ground, and swept his leg out. Bakugo, overextended from his attack, was caught by the ankle. He grunted in surprise as his feet were knocked out from under him. He twisted in midair, firing a blast at the ground to right himself, landing in a crouch. He stared at the silent figure who was already back on his feet, standing in a perfect combat stance. There was a terrifying economy to his movements. No wasted energy. No flashy poses. Just pure, lethal efficiency. What the hell? Bakugo breathed. Bakugo, be careful. Fat Gum called out, absorbing a volley of energy rounds from the other Hydra agents. His movements are too clean. He's fighting like he knows what you're going to do. He's right, Bakugo thought, a knot of angry confusion tightening in his gut. It's like, he's seen all my moves before. He pushed the unsettling thought aside and charged again, this time closing the distance for close-quarters combat. He feinted with his right, then brought his left around for a massive explosion point-blank to the villain's face. Cipher didn't even try to block with his flesh-and-blood arm. The cybernetic limb snapped up, his open palm catching Bakugo's entire gauntlet. The explosion detonated, a deafening boom that shook the overpass. The force of it should have torn the villain's arm off, should have sent him flying into the burning wreck behind him. Instead, the metal arm absorbed the brunt of the blast with a deep, resonating thud. The plates glowed red for a second, vents hissing as they dispersed the heat, but they held. Cipher hadn't been moved an inch. From behind the mask, the muttering continued, faster now. Close quarters engagement. Subject utilizes explosive propulsion for enhanced speed and power. Predictable arcing trajectories. High impact detonation at 1.2 meters. Metal arm integrity at 98.4%. Acceptable. Exploit recovery time post-detonation. Before Bakugo could process the fact that his attack had been completely negated, Cipher used his grip on the gauntlet to twist. With inhuman strength, he spun Bakugo around, using his own momentum against him, and slammed him face first into the side of the armored truck. The impact was jarring, knocking the air from Bakugo's lungs. His ears rang. The metal of the truck groaned under the force. He pushed himself off, gasping, and spun around, only to be met with a swift, brutal combination of strikes. A punch to the ribs with the right hand, a disabling chop to the shoulder with the edge of the left. Each blow landed with surgical precision on nerve clusters and joints. It wasn't a brawler's wild flurry. It was a calculated disassembly. Bakugo roared in pain and fury, creating a massive explosion around his entire body to force the villain back. Get off me! Cipher leaped back, landing silently 10 feet away, completely unharmed. He had anticipated the defensive blast, and was already out of range before it reached its peak intensity. Frustration was boiling into pure, unadulterated rage in Bakugo's chest. He was being played with. This quirkless nobody, this ghost, was taking him apart with an ease that was deeply, personally insulting. He was supposed to be the prodigy, the future number one. But this felt hauntingly familiar. The way Cipher tilted his head as he analyzed him. The way he dodged, not just reacting but understanding the fundamental mechanics of his quirk. The low, constant muttering that he could now hear clearly in the brief lulls in the fight. A frantic, whispered stream of analysis. No. The thought was a cold spike of ice in his gut. It can't be. He shook his head, trying to clear the impossible notion. Deku was gone. Vanished 5 years ago. A quirkless, useless wannabe who had probably given up on his stupid dreams and was working some dead-end job somewhere. This thing in front of him was a monster. A weapon, and yet, I'm going to wipe that stupid mask off your face. Bakugo screamed, his control slipping. He launched himself into the air, spinning like a top. Howitzer impact. It was his super move. A massive, fiery vortex designed to annihilate everything in its path. It was overkill. It was reckless. And it was exactly what Cipher was waiting for. Super move initiated, howitzer impact. High yield, wide area thermokinetic attack. Unsuitable for direct blocking. Evasion is optimal. Attack vector is linear. Subject will be disoriented and vulnerable for 2.3 seconds upon landing. As Bakugo descended like a meteor, Cipher did something unexpected. He didn't run. He dropped a small, metallic disc on the ground, then sprinted towards Bakugo's landing zone. Just as the massive explosion detonated where Cipher had been standing, the disc erupted in a blinding flash of white light and a piercing sonic frequency. Bakugo landed in the heart of his own inferno, his senses already overwhelmed. The flashbang went off right in his face. His vision bleached white, and the sonic screech felt like a needle in his eardrums. He was completely blind and deaf, stumbling, his head roaring with static. In that 2.3 seconds of vulnerability, Cipher struck. He moved through the edge of the firestorm, the heat scorching his tactical gear but not slowing him down. He grabbed Bakugo's head with his human hand, slamming it against the pavement. He raised his metal fist, prepared to deliver a concussion that would end the fight. The mission was to retrieve the cargo, but neutralizing the primary threat was a necessary step. But as he looked down at the furious, disoriented face of the boy beneath him, at the spiky ash-blonde hair and the snarling mouth, another error message flared in his programming. A ghost of a memory, stronger this time. A playground. The smell of cinnamon and caramel from Bakugo's sweat. A smaller hand, his own, reaching out. That's mean, Kaken. Error, corrupted data fragment detected. Source unknown. Purge immediately. The command was absolute. The flicker of memory was instantly suppressed. But it had cost him 0.4 seconds. It was enough time for Bakugo's vision to start clearing. He saw the metal fist descending and reacted on pure instinct, rolling violently to the side. The fist smashed into the asphalt where his head had been, shattering the pavement, and leaving a spiderweb of cracks. Bakugo scrambled back, his ears still ringing, his heart pounding with a mixture of adrenaline and a terrifying, creeping dread. The fighting style was one thing. The analysis was another. But that moment of hesitation. He got to his feet, breathing heavily. He looked at the silent assassin, who was already recalibrating, his mission parameters reasserting themselves. This fight was becoming a frustrating quagmire of confusion and rage for Bakugo. He couldn't land a clean hit. He couldn't understand his opponent. And a dark, impossible truth was scratching at the locked doors of his mind, a truth he had buried 5 years ago under a mountain of guilt and arrogance. Who the hell are you? Bakugo demanded, his voice raspy. How do you know how I fight? Why do you? He couldn't finish the sentence. His throat felt tight. Cipher remained silent, his programming now fully restabilized. The emotional fragment was gone. The objective was clear. He took a step forward, ready to re-engage. It was the final straw for Bakugo. The silence, the creepy muttering, the feeling of being analyzed by a ghost from his past, it all coalesced into a single, explosive point of fury. He fell back on the one thing he always had, the raw, unfiltered rage that had defined him for years. And with it came the old words. The old taunts, the ones he had used 1,000 times on a certain green-haired, freckled crybaby. I'm talking to you, you damn extra! He bellowed, his voice cracking with a strange mix of anger and something else, something that sounded almost like pleading. He pointed a trembling, gauntlet finger at the assassin. Stop mumbling and fight me, you damn ghost! The words ripped through the air, louder than any explosion, and the ghost froze. It wasn't a tactical pause. It wasn't a feint. For one complete, shattering second, Cipher's entire body went rigid. His cybernetic arm, poised to strike, lowered by a fraction of an inch. The glowing green lenses of his goggles flickered erratically, like a corrupted video file. Behind the mask, inside the chemically scrubbed, brutally conditioned mind of the asset, a dam broke. The word wasn't a command Hydra had installed. It was older. Deeper. It was a key that had been forged in childhood, tempered in the fires of bullying and rivalry. Mumbling, It was inextricably linked to his core identity, the one they had tried so hard to erase. A tidal wave of sensory data, unbidden and overwhelming, crashed through the firewalls of his conditioning. A flash of a middle school classroom, the scent of chalk dust and old paper. A younger Bakugo, sneering, smoke curling from his palms. Stop your creepy mumbling, it's pissing me off, Deku. A flash of a riverbank. The sting of tears. His prized notebook, scorched and smoking, sinking into the murky water. You'll never be a hero with all that useless mumbling. A flash of a rooftop. All Might's back, shrinking as he leaped away. The wind whistling in his ears. The feeling of absolute, soul-crushing despair. Izuku, his name. His real name. It was a ghost on his tongue, a forgotten taste, critical system error. Conflicting directives. Identity protocol compromised. Rebooting. Reboot failed. The programming screamed at him. The mission. The objective. Neutralize the threat. But the voice was being drowned out by the ghost of a 14-year-old boy who just wanted to be a hero. He clutched his head with his human hand, a strangled, inhuman sound escaping his vocoder. Pain, not physical, but psychic, lanced through his mind. The world tilted, the carefully constructed reality of the asset fracturing into a million pieces. He had hesitated for too long. Now, Fat Gum, having finally absorbed enough kinetic energy from the Hydra agent's weapons, saw the opening. He had been waiting, watching, and he saw the assassin inexplicably freeze. He was no longer a slim, jovial hero. He was a cannonball of flesh and determination. He launched himself forward, his body a golden, shimmering wrecking ball. Spear of the mighty Fat, he slammed into Cipher with the force of a freight train. There was no time to block, no time to dodge. The asset, his mind in turmoil, took the full impact. The blows sent him flying backward, tumbling end over end through the air. He crashed through the concrete guardrail of the overpass and plummeted toward the street below. Bakugo could only watch, frozen in place, his own words echoing in his ears. He saw the figure disappear over the edge. A moment later, the sound of a grappling line firing and biting into the underside of the expressway reached him. Cipher had saved himself. He swung under the bridge and disappeared into the labyrinth of the city's underbelly. The remaining Hydra agents, their leader gone, threw down smoke pellets and vanished in the ensuing confusion. The fight was over. The convoy was secure. The heroes had won. But Bakugo felt a cold, hollowing dread that tasted exactly like defeat. Kirishima ran up to him, his unbreakable form receding. Whoa, that was intense. You okay, man? He got you good. Bakugo didn't answer. He walked slowly to the broken guardrail where the ghost had fallen. He stared down into the shadows, his breathing ragged. Bakugo? Fat Gum asked, his voice gentle but firm. What was that? What did you say to him? He just stopped. Bakugo clenched his fists, his gauntlets creaking under the pressure. He couldn't explain it. He couldn't give voice to the monstrous, impossible suspicion that was now solidifying in his chest. The way the ghost fought, the analytical muttering, the way he had frozen when Bakugo yelled at him. It was a constellation of evidence pointing to a conclusion so horrifying he didn't want to believe it. He thought of a useless, quirkless nerd who had trailed after him his whole life. A boy he had tormented, belittled, and told to take a swan dive off the roof of a building. A boy who had vanished off the face of the earth 5 years ago, the same day his own life had been changed by the sludge villain. He felt a wave of nausea so profound he had to brace himself against the rail. I don't know, Bakugo lied, his voice a low, strangled whisper, but he did know. Or at least he knew he had to find out. He stared into the darkness where the ghost had vanished, and for the first time since he was 4 years old, Katsuki Bakugo felt something other than anger or pride. He felt fear. And a deep, suffocating guilt that was only just beginning to awaken. The sterile white walls of the conference room at the Muzidafu police headquarters felt like they were closing in. It was a space designed for clarity and order, but the atmosphere within was thick with a tense, unsettling ambiguity. The air hummed with the quiet whir of a projector, casting a series of grainy, enhanced security camera stills onto a large screen. On one side of the polished table sat the heroes. Principal Nizu, his beady eyes betraying an intelligence that was far from animalistic, stirred his tea with a thoughtful clink of his spoon. Beside him, Shota Aizawa looked even more exhausted than usual, his face a mask of grim focus, a fresh bandage peeking out from under his dark hair. And at the head of the table, a gaunt, skeletal figure in an oversized yellow suit sat slumped in his chair. Tashinori Yagi, the man who was once All Might, looked as though the weight of the world had finally settled on his frail shoulders, a burden he could no longer lift. On the other side sat the law. Detective Naomasa Tsukachi, a man whose quirk, human lie detector, had made him the most trusted interrogator in the force, presided over the meeting. His face was etched with professional concern, a stack of thin file folders placed neatly before him. He wore his signature tan trench coat, even indoors, as if it were a second skin. The images on the screen cycled through the events of the Esuha City incident. A still of Cipher, a featureless black silhouette, dodging Bakugo's AP shot, a blurry frame of his cybernetic arm catching an explosion. And the final, most perplexing shot, Cipher, standing frozen for a split second, a moment of inexplicable vulnerability before Fat Gum's attack. Fat Gum's report is consistent with yours, Aizawa. Tsukachi began, his voice a calm, grounding presence in the tense room. The subject, who we're now tentatively calling Cipher, displayed superhuman strength, speed, and durability, all without any detectable quirk usage. His combat prowess and tactical analysis are, by all accounts, on par with a top-tier pro hero. He is not merely on par, Aizawa corrected, his voice a low rasp. He is different. More efficient. There's no wasted energy in his movements, no ego. It's like fighting a machine that's running a perfect combat simulation. He dismantled young Bakugo, a student with one of the most powerful and versatile quirks at UA, with frightening ease. Niza set his teacup down. The most fascinating and disturbing element remains his quirklessness. For decades, the paradigm has been that significant power requires a significant quirk. This individual shatters that assumption. If an organization has found a way to bestow this level of physical power and skill onto a quirkless individual, the implications for societal stability are catastrophic. Tashinori listened, his hands clasped so tightly on the table that his knuckles were white. Every mention of quirkless was a fresh stab of guilt. He had been so certain, so absolute in his judgment that day on the rooftop. You need to be realistic, kid. He had spoken from a place of concern, trying to protect a boy from a dangerous dream. But what if his words hadn't been a shield? What if they had been a hammer, shattering the boy's spirit, and leaving him vulnerable to the monsters who truly lurked in the dark? He tried to push the thought away. It was a coincidence. The world was full of quirkless people. It couldn't be that boy. The odds were astronomical. And yet the description, highly analytical, strategic, it fit perfectly. A cold dread, heavy and suffocating, began to pool in his stomach. He hadn't felt this powerless since the night his master, Nana Shimura, had died. The analytical muttering is the key, Aizawa continued, rubbing his tired eyes. Bakugo reported it as well. He said it was like Cipher was narrating the fight, predicting every move. It's a unique behavioral tic. I've cross-referenced it with UA's student database going back 20 years. It's rare, but not unheard of, usually linked to high anxiety or intense focus. Tsukachi nodded, sliding the top file folder across the table. That brings us to the first concrete piece of evidence we have. After your initial encounter, Aizawa, my forensics team did a sweep of the area around the Aegis Tower. They canvassed for blocks. In a trash can 3 streets over, they found this. He clicked a button on the remote, and the image on the screen changed. It was a photograph of a soggy, burnt, and torn notebook page. Most of the writing was illegible, a smeared mess of ink and grime, but in the top corner, a few lines of neat, almost obsessive handwriting were miraculously preserved. Tashinori's breath hitched. He leaned forward, his eyes wide, his heart suddenly pounding a frantic, painful rhythm against his ribs. The text was a detailed breakdown of the pro-hero Kamui Woods. It analyzed his arbor quirk, theorized potential weaknesses to fire and desiccation, and even sketched out a hypothetical counter-strategy involving exploiting his limited mobility in enclosed spaces. It was brilliant, insightful, and terrifyingly familiar. The analysis is genius level, Sakachi said, his voice grim. But that's not the most important part. We ran the handwriting through the national database. We got a match. The notebook belonged to a middle school student who was reported missing 5 years ago. A boy by the name of Izuka Midoriya. The name hung in the air, thick and heavy with unspoken meaning. Aizawa's eyes shot open, the pieces clicking into place with horrifying clarity. The analytical muttering he'd found so familiar. It wasn't from a UA exam. It was from the news footage of the sludge villain incident, 5 years ago. The quirkless boy who had rushed in when the heroes hesitated. Knees bristled. Izuka Midoriya. That name is in our records. He applied to UA's hero course the year of the incident. He scored exceptionally high on the written exam but was a no-show for the practical. But it was Tashinori who had the most violent reaction. A choked, strangled sound escaped his lips. The room seemed to tilt, the air thinning until he couldn't breathe. The face of a tear-streaked, green-haired boy with eyes full of desperate hope flashed in his mind. The boy he had met twice in one day. The boy he had saved. The boy he had broken. All Might? Aizawa asked, his voice sharp with concern. You know this name. Tashinori couldn't speak. He could only nod, his entire body trembling. He felt a familiar, coppery taste in his mouth as a trickle of blood ran from the corner of his lips. The guilt was no longer a suspicion. It was a physical entity, a venom spreading through his veins. What have I done? Sakachi's expression softened with a pained understanding. He knew Tashinori's secret, and he knew the timeline. He could see the terrible equation adding up on his friend's face. Tashinori, was this the boy from that day? I told him he couldn't be a hero. Tashinori whispered, his voice cracking, the confession tearing from him like a shard of glass. He asked me if someone without a quirk could be a hero, and I was at my limit. I was careless. I told him no. I left him on that rooftop, alone. The silence that followed was absolute, heavy with the weight of that 5-year-old mistake. Aizawa stared at him, his usual apathy replaced by a look of dawning horror. Even Nizu's normally inscrutable expression betrayed a flicker of shock. They had just found the origin point of their ghost, and it wasn't in a villain's lab or a shadowy organization. It was in the careless words of the symbol of peace. For Katsuki Bakugo, the world had lost its vibrant, explosive color. It had been replaced by a dull, gray monochrome of simmering rage and annoying, unfamiliar feeling that he was beginning to identify as guilt. He wasn't sleeping. Every time he closed his eyes he saw it, the flicker of hesitation in the ghost's posture, the way he'd frozen at the sound of a childhood taunt. He replayed their fight endlessly, not with the goal of finding a weakness to exploit, but with a desperate, obsessive need to find proof that he was wrong. But the more he watched the security footage, which he had practically stolen from the police archives via a very reluctant best genist, the more convinced he became. The ghost's movements, for all their cold precision, held echoes of Deku. The way he anticipated attacks was just like how the nerd used to scribble in his notebooks, predicting hero moves before they happened. The way he used his environment was pure tactical analysis, not brute force. It was Deku's brain in a super soldier's body. He was in the training grounds at UA, designated Ground Gamma, a labyrinth of industrial pipes and factories. He was supposed to be working on his ultimate moves, but instead, he was just blasting things. He fired off a howitzer impact, the massive explosion echoing through the complex, but the release felt hollow. There was no satisfaction, only a fresh wave of frustration. You're going to level the whole facility if you keep that up. Bakugo spun around, his hands crackling. Kirishima stood at the entrance to the training area, his arms crossed, his usual cheerful smile replaced by a look of genuine concern. What do you want, shitty hair? Bakugo snarled, turning back to face a particularly large smokestack. I wanted to see if you were okay, Kirishima said, walking closer, unfazed by the aggressive posture. You've been off ever since that fight on the overpass. More than your usual brand of grumpy. I'm fine, Bakugo bit out, firing a smaller, more controlled blast that dented the smokestack. No, you're not, Kirishima said, his voice firm. I was there, man. I saw it. That villain, he had you on the ropes. And then you yelled at him, and he just stopped. What's the deal, Bakugo? Do you know him? Bakugo froze, his back to Kirishima. The direct question was like a physical blow. He could lie. He could blow up and tell Kirishima to mind his own damn business. It was the easy way out, the Bakugo way, but the lie felt like ash in his mouth. The weight of this was too heavy to carry alone, and if there was one person in the world he trusted not to treat him like glass, it was Kirishima. He let his hands fall to his sides, the crackling energy dying down. He didn't turn around. His muttering, Bakugo said, his voice low and gravelly, almost unrecognizable. I knew this damn nerd in middle school. Useless. Quirkless. Always followed me around, scribbling in these creepy notebooks, mumbling about heroes. Kirishima was silent, listening intently. He was obsessed, Bakugo continued, the memories pouring out now, bitter and sharp. Always analyzing quirks, my quirk. He could predict what I was going to do before I even did it. Drove me insane. I called him Deku. Because he couldn't do anything. He finally turned, and the look on his face was one Kirishima had never seen before. It wasn't anger or pride. It was a raw, haunted vulnerability. That ghost, that villain, he fought like he had one of those notebooks in his head. And the muttering, it was the same damn creepy muttering, Midoriya. Kirishima breathed, the name from the news reports about the missing boy finally connecting. You think that villain is Izuku Midoriya? He disappeared 5 years ago, Bakugo said, running a hand through his spiky hair, a gesture of pure agitation. The same day as the sludge villain attack. The day I... He trailed off, unable to say the words. The day I was weak. The day he was strong. He remembered the feeling of the sludge pouring down his throat, the terror of drowning on dry land. And he remembered Deku, quirkless, terrified Deku, throwing his backpack and clawing at the filth, trying to save him when no one else would. He had been a hero that day. And how had Bakugo repaid him? With scorn. With rage. With a dismissal so complete it had probably felt like a knife in the back. He tried to save me, Bakugo whispered, the admission costing him everything. And I was a complete bastard to him. The morning before all that. I burned his notebook. I told him if he wanted a quirk so bad, he should take a swan dive off the roof. The confession hung in the air between them, ugly and irrevocable. Kirishima's eyes widened in shock. He had known Bakugo had a mean streak, but this was on another level. He didn't condemn him, though. He just saw the profound, crushing guilt that was eating his friend alive. Bakugo, Kirishima said softly. You were just a kid. A stupid kid who said a horrible thing. You didn't know this would happen, didn't I? Bakugo shot back, his voice thick with self-loathing. I pushed him. I bullied him. I told him he was worthless his entire life. If he was broken enough for some villains to come in and do this to him, then I'm the one who broke him first. He punched the metal wall of the factory beside him, leaving a large, smoking dent. The pain was a welcome distraction from the turmoil in his soul. I have to know for sure, Kirishima. I have to see his face. The Hydra facility was deep underground, a place of cold steel, humming machinery, and the pervasive scent of antiseptic. It was a tomb where a boy named Izuku had been buried and a weapon named Cipher had been forged. The asset stood motionless in a debriefing chamber, his mask and goggles removed. His face was a pale, emotionless sculpture. His green eyes, once so vibrant and full of life, were dull and vacant. A thin, faded scar cut across his left eyebrow, a memento from a training session that had gone wrong. Across from him, a man known only as the commander reviewed the mission data on a holographic display. He was the one who had overseen the asset's creation, a man with a face like a hawk and eyes that held no warmth. The mission was a partial failure, the commander stated, his voice as cold as the room. You retrieved the primary data drive, but the secondary objective, Tanaka's personal files, was not secured. Furthermore, you engaged 2 pro-heroes and a UA student, exposing your existence to a degree that is inconvenient. The asset did not react. He simply stared at a point on the wall behind the commander's head. The most troubling report is this, the commander continued, swiping the display to show a biofeedback log from the fight with Bakugo. A section of the timeline was highlighted in red. For 1.6 seconds, you ceased to follow mission parameters. Your vitals spiked. Neural activity showed a massive cascade failure in the conditioning protocols. You experienced an echo. He spoke the word as if it were a disease. Explain. The subject. Bakugo utilized an auditory trigger, the asset recited, his voice a flat monotone. The phrase "stop mumbling" is linked to pre-acquisition trauma. It created a momentary logic loop. A logic loop that nearly got you captured or destroyed, the commander hissed, stepping closer until he was inches from the asset's face. He scrutinized the boy's empty eyes. The Midoriya personality is buried deep, but it seems the roots are more stubborn than we anticipated. It is a flaw in the design. A bug that must be purged. He turned away. Prep him for the chair. Full neurological realignment. We will dig out every last remnant of that pathetic, crying child until nothing is left but the mission. Yes, Commander, a technician replied from the corner of the room. The asset was led away. He did not resist. He felt no fear. The chair was simply another part of his existence, a routine maintenance procedure like cleaning a rifle or calibrating his arm. He was strapped in, the familiar heavy helmet lowered over his head, the rubber bit forced between his teeth. As the machine whirred to life, charging for the first brain-searing jolt, a flicker of something moved in the deepest, most fortified corners of his mind. Not a memory, not even a thought, but a phantom sensation, the feeling of a warm hand on his head. His mother's hand, the smell of burnt sugar and nitroglycerin, the sight of a radiant, impossibly wide smile. Then the electricity hit, and it all burned away to white-hot static. The purge was aggressive, deeper than ever before. Hydra was not just wiping his memory. They were trying to scorch the very soil from which it grew. But as the current ripped through his synapses, the phantoms didn't just disappear. They were compressed, crushed down into something small and dense, a hard, indigestible kernel of who he used to be, buried so deep that even Hydra's machines couldn't quite reach it. When it was over, he was led back to his cell. He felt cleaner, emptier. The echoes were gone. The logic loops were patched. There was only the cold, clear certainty of his purpose. Murioku. Zetsubo. Seze. Shiko. Mokotiki. The words settled over his consciousness like a fresh blanket of snow, covering everything. He was the asset. He was ready to comply. But deep beneath the snow, under layers of ice and frozen earth, a single, stubborn seed refused to die. Hydra did not tolerate failure. More than that, they did not tolerate loose ends. The partial success of the convoy raid was an insult, and the subsequent media frenzy around the quirkless ghost was a glaring security breach. The asset known as Cipher was becoming a legend, a boogeyman whispered about on hero forums and in criminal circles alike. Legends were unpredictable. Legends drew attention. Hydra required surgical precision and absolute anonymity. The commander, a man who saw the world as a grand, chaotic equation that only he could solve, decided a change in strategy was required. Subtlety had failed. It was time for a display of power, a public move so audacious it would sow chaos and force the hero-centric society to question its own foundations. He would turn their greatest strength, their reliance on public perception, into a crippling weakness. The target was Dr. Eris Thorne, a brilliant but disgraced geneticist. Thorne had once worked for Detnerat, pioneering research into quirk singularity, but his radical theories on quirk suppression and eradication had seen him ousted. Now, he was scheduled to be the keynote speaker at the International Symposium on Quirk Advancement, held at the prestigious Musée de Grand Hall. Hydra had no interest in Thorne's theories. They wanted the man himself. His knowledge of genetic sequencing and bioengineering was a resource they intended to acquire, by any means necessary. The mission parameters for Cipher were updated. This was not a silent extraction. It was a public snatch and grab. He was to infiltrate the symposium, incapacitate any resistance, and capture Dr. Thorne in front of the assembled media and heroes. The message would be clear: not even your most public figures are safe. We can take anyone, anytime, anywhere. Cipher received his orders with the same placid obedience as always. The recent session in the chair had been brutally effective. The confusing echoes of the boy named Izuku were gone, replaced by a crystalline, cold logic. He checked his gear, calibrated his arm, and memorized the schematics of the Grand Hall. The mission was a problem, he was the solution. The Musudafu Grand Hall was a marvel of modern architecture, a sweeping structure of glass and steel that seemed to defy gravity. Inside, it was a hive of activity. Heroes, scientists, politicians, and reporters from around the world mingled under the soft glow of elegant chandeliers. The air buzzed with intellectual fervor and the quiet, ever-present hum of security. UA High, as part of its ongoing community outreach and work-study programs, had been tasked with providing secondary security for the event. It was considered a low-risk assignment, a chance for students to gain experience in crowd control and dignitary protection. Ochako Uraraka, in her hero costume, stood near the main stage, her expression a mixture of awe and professional focus. This was the big leagues. She watched the crowd, her eyes scanning for any signs of trouble, though mostly she just saw famous heroes she had only ever admired on television. Nervous? A calm voice asked from beside her. She turned to see Shoto Todoroki, his posture relaxed but his heterochromatic eyes missing nothing. He stood like a silent sentinel, a perfect picture of calm readiness. A little, Uraraka admitted, her cheeks flushing slightly. It's just, there are so many important people here. It's a lot of pressure. The best way to handle pressure is to be prepared, Todoroki said, his gaze sweeping the ornate balconies above them. Our job is to observe and report. We only engage if the pro-heroes on primary detail are overwhelmed. Right, Uraraka nodded, her resolve hardening. This was her duty. She could do this. On stage, Dr. Thorne, a severe-looking man with wire-rimmed glasses and a palpable air of self-importance, approached the podium to a smattering of polite applause. He tapped the microphone, the sound echoing through the cavernous hall. Esteemed colleagues, heroes, for too long, we have celebrated the chaotic proliferation of quirks without considering the endgame, he began, his voice dripping with condescending authority. The so-called quirk singularity is not a distant theory. It is a coming tidal wave that will. He never got to finish his sentence. A sudden, sharp crack echoed from the glass ceiling high above. All heads snapped upward. A spider web of fractures appeared in a massive pane of reinforced glass directly above the stage. Before anyone could react, the glass didn't just break. It atomized into a fine, glittering dust, as if disintegrated by a high-frequency sonic pulse. From the newly created opening, a figure rappelled down, moving with terrifying speed and silence. It was Cipher. Panic erupted. The polite, intellectual atmosphere of the symposium shattered into a cacophony of screams and scrambling bodies. The pro-heroes on the security detail, caught completely by surprise, surged toward the stage. Cipher landed in a perfect three-point crouch behind the podium, the grappling line retracting into his cybernetic arm with a barely audible zip. He rose, his green-goggled gaze fixing on the terrified Dr. Thorne. "You're not getting him!" shouted a pro-hero with a minor rock manipulation quirk, sending a shard of the marble stage flying at Cipher. Cipher didn't even look. He took a single step to the side, letting the projectile whistle past him. His muttering had already begun, a low, rapid-fire analysis of the unfolding chaos. Mass panic. Optimal for mission. Primary security response. 4 pro-heroes. Quirks, minor earth manipulation, elasticity, light projection, enhanced senses. All C list. Inefficient. UA students present. Threat level moderate. He moved to grab Dr. Thorne, but a pink-clad figure suddenly shot between them. It was Uraraka. "Stop right there!" she yelled, her voice trembling slightly but her stance firm. She had seen the pro-heroes being outmaneuvered and knew she couldn't wait. Her duty was to protect. Cipher paused. He analyzed her. UA student. Hero name Uravity. Quirk, 0 gravity. Renders objects weightless upon contact with all 5 fingers. Threat, close quarters engagement. Counter, maintain distance, disrupt balance, exploit recovery time after quirk deactivation. He lunged not at her, but to her left. Uraraka, expecting a direct assault, was forced to pivot. She reached out, trying to touch him, to make him float and render him helpless. But he was impossibly fast, his movements fluid and predictive. He seemed to know exactly where her hands would be, staying just a centimeter out of her reach. He wasn't just dodging. He was flowing around her, forcing her to overextend, to lose her footing on the debris-strewn stage. Her determined face, framed by her brown hair and pink helmet, was a new data point for his combat computer. But as he looked at her, at the genuine, selfless heroism in her eyes, another one of those phantom errors flared deep within his mind. A flash of a giant robot, 0-pointers, in a simulated city. A girl with brown hair trapped under rubble. A desperate, quirkless boy leaping into the air, an exam he had studied for but never taken. Error, data fragment irrelevant to mission parameters. Flag for purging. The flicker of a ghost of a life he never lived made him hesitate for a nanosecond. It was an imperceptible pause to anyone else, but for a trained hero, it was a window. Now! Uraraka yelled. An enormous wave of ice erupted from the side of the stage, surging towards Cipher. Todoroki had joined the fray, his expression cold and focused. The ice wall was meant to trap Cipher, to encase him completely. Cipher reacted instantly, the error purged, his tactical mind reasserting control. He couldn't dodge the wall of ice. It was too wide, too fast. So he didn't try. He spun, planting his feet, and drove his cybernetic arm into the approaching glacier. There was a deafening crack. The ice didn't just stop, it shattered. Radio fractures spread from the point of impact, and the entire wall of ice exploded outward in a shower of frozen shrapnel. The sheer, raw power of the blow was breathtaking. Todoroki's eyes widened slightly. His ice, which had stopped villains far stronger than this, had been pulverized by a single punch. This opponent's physical strength was on a whole other level. Impressive, Todoroki said, his left side flaring to life, flames licking at his arm. But you're still just one man. He sent a wave of fire roaring across the stage. Cipher leaped backward, the flames washing over the spot where he had been standing. He landed nimbly on the podium, his muttering continuing unabated. Dual-element quirk user. Fire and ice. High output, wide area attacks. Maintain mobility. Exploit the delay when switching between elements. The fight became a deadly dance. Todoroki would unleash massive attacks of ice and fire, forcing Cipher to stay constantly on the move, while Uraraka would try to close the distance, to get her hands on him. But Cipher was a ghost. He flowed between the attacks, using the chaos as cover. He knocked over a large speaker, forcing Uraraka to use her quirk to save the reporters below instead of attacking him. He used the reflection in a shard of ice to anticipate an attack from Todoroki's blind side. He was fighting two of UA's brightest students to a standstill, all while keeping Dr. Thorne from escaping. The pro-heroes were trying to help, but they were outclassed. Cipher moved with a purpose and precision that made their efforts look clumsy and slow. He was a shark in a tank of minnows. Suddenly, a new sound cut through the din, the unmistakable roar of explosions, getting closer. The main doors of the grand hall burst open. Get the hell out of the way! A familiar voice bellowed. Katsuki Bakugo, propelled by his explosions, shot through the hall like a human missile. He had been on patrol 3 blocks away with all might, in his Tashinori form, acting as a civilian advisor, when the call came in. Bakugo had recognized the description of the attacker instantly. This was his chance. He landed on the stage, his gauntlets already sparking. His eyes, burning with an intensity that bordered on madness, locked onto Cipher. I knew I'd find you here, you damn ghost. This time, you're not getting away. Beside him, a skeletal figure in a baggy suit limped forward, a grim, determined look on his face. Tashinori Yagi couldn't fight, but he had to be here. He had to see for himself. He had to face the consequences of his words. Cipher's head snapped toward the new arrivals. His internal processors went into overdrive. Subject Bakugo. Threat level high. Previous engagement data analyzed. New variable, all might, weak in form. Non-combatant, but high symbolic value. Emotional trigger potential, significant. Prioritized neutralization of Bakugo. He moved, a black blur of motion. But Bakugo, fueled by guilt and a desperate need for confirmation, was ready. He didn't lead with a flashy move. He fired a series of small, rapid-fire explosions at Cipher's feet, like stun grenades. The tactic was designed not to do damage, but to disrupt, to force his opponent into the air. As Cipher leaped to avoid the blasts, Bakugo was already there, meeting him in the air with a powerful right hook aimed directly at his head. "I've been studying you, you bastard!" Cipher twisted, his metal arm coming up to block. But it was a feint. Bakugo's real attack was a massive explosion from his left hand, aimed not at Cipher's body, but at the side of his head. It was a desperate, all-or-nothing gamble. Boom! The explosion was deafening. It wasn't a direct hit, but the concussive force was immense. Cipher was blasted sideways, sent tumbling through the air. He hit the ground hard, rolling several times before skidding to a stop in a heap of shattered stage equipment. For a moment there was silence, broken only by the crackling of Todoroki's flames and the distant sirens. Everyone stared, waiting to see if the ghost would get up. Slowly, he pushed himself to his knees. He seemed dazed. The explosion had done more damage than anyone anticipated, and then they saw it. Bakugo's blast had caught the edge of his headgear. The ballistic mask was cracked, and the strap that held it in place had snapped. With a faint click, the shattered mask fell to the floor. The glowing green goggles flickered once, then twice, before falling off his face, their power source disrupted. Silence. A profound, soul-shattering silence fell over the grand hall. The screams, the explosions, the chaos, it all faded into an insignificant hum. The world seemed to hold its breath. The face that was revealed was no longer that of a boy. It was the face of a young man, pale and gaunt, with a constellation of freckles scattered across his cheeks like faint, forgotten stars. His green hair was matted with sweat and grime. A thin scar traced a path through his left eyebrow. But the most horrifying part was his eyes. They were wide, unfocused, and utterly, terrifyingly empty. They were the eyes of someone who wasn't there, a hollow shell where a soul used to be. It was, unmistakably, the face of Izuku Midoriya. A collective gasp went through the heroes. Uraraka brought her hands to her mouth, her eyes wide with horrified recognition. He was the kind, nervous boy she had met at the UA entrance exam, the one who had tried to give her his points. What had happened to him? Todoroki's flames died down, his usual cold composure completely gone, replaced by stunned disbelief. This was the monster they had been fighting? This haunted-looking young man? Tashinori Yagi stumbled back as if he had been physically struck. The air left his lungs in a painful rush. The suspicion he had been nursing, the guilt he had been drowning in, was nothing compared to this. The reality was 1,000 times worse. Seeing the boy's face, seeing the utter vacancy in his eyes, it was a mirror reflecting his greatest failure. "No," he whispered, the word a choked, broken thing. "Young Midoriya, what have I done?" But the most powerful reaction came from Bakugo. He stood frozen, his gauntlets smoking, his entire body trembling. The impossible truth he had been chasing was now staring him in the face, and it was more monstrous than he could have ever imagined. The ghost had a name. The ghost had the face of the boy he had tormented his entire life. The scars, the dead eyes, the cybernetic arm, it was all evidence of a nightmare he had helped create. Deku. The name, once a taunt, now escaped his lips as a choked, horrified whisper. The sound of it, spoken in that specific, familiar voice, was a master key unlocking 1,000 sealed doors in Cipher's mind. It bypassed the firewalls, it ignored the conditioning. It was the name that defined his powerlessness, the name that encapsulated his entire pre-Hydra existence. Izuku Midoriya. Cipher clutched his head, his human hand digging into his own hair. He let out a low, guttural groan of agony. The world was spinning. Two realities were at war behind his eyes. The cold, sterile white of the Hydra facility. The voice of the commander. "Your purpose is the mission." The warm, gentle green of his mother's eyes. Her voice. "I'm so proud of you, Izuku." The brutal, efficient movements of a trained killer. Breaking bones. Neutralizing targets. The frantic, clumsy movements of a hero wannabe. Clawing at sludge. Leaping at a robot. Nurioku. Zetsubo. Seze. Shiko. Mokotiki, All Might. Kaken. Mom. Yue. The contradictory data streams crashed together, creating a feedback loop of psychic agony. His programming was screaming at him, complete the mission. Capture the target. Eliminate threats. But the ghost of Izuku Midoriya was screaming back. Who are these people? Why do they look so sad? Why does that name hurt so much? Asset, what is your status? The commander's voice suddenly crackled in a hidden earpiece, cold and sharp. The mission is compromised. Abort. I repeat, abort. Extraction team is en route. The command was a lifeline in the storm of his fracturing mind. Extraction. Retreat. Survive. He stumbled to his feet, his movements clumsy, uncoordinated. He looked around, his eyes wild and confused. He saw Bakugo, his face a mask of horror. He saw All Might, a skeleton of the hero he once worshipped. He saw the kind-faced girl, her eyes filled with pity. It was too much. Hydra's extraction team chose that moment to strike. Several smoke grenades detonated simultaneously, filling the stage with a thick, disorienting black smoke. In the ensuing chaos, figures in the same tactical gear as Cipher rappelled down from the ceiling. They grabbed their faltering asset, along with the still cowering Dr. Thorne. He's getting away! Bakugo roared, snapping out of his stupor. He lunged into the smoke, explosions propelling him forward, but he was too late. He found only an empty stage. The grappling lines were already retracting, carrying the agents, their prize, and the broken boy who used to be his friend, up into the shattered ceiling and away into the night. The smoke began to clear, revealing the devastated stage and the stunned, silent heroes. They had failed. The target was gone, but no one was thinking about Dr. Thorne. They were all staring at the spot where Izuku Midoriya had been. They were staring at the shattered black mask lying on the floor, a stark symbol of the boy they had lost, and the monster they had just found. Bakugo fell to his knees, his hands on the ground, his head bowed. The roar of his ambition, the fire of his pride, was gone. All that was left was a cold, empty cavern of guilt, echoing with a single, whispered name. Deku.